Hello out there in Guitar Moderne land. I hope you're all safe and healthy. This interview is a little different. Peter Parcek is nominally a blues guitar player, but as you may be familiar, if those of you who are familiar with the site, the Guitar Moderne site, will know that occasionally I feature Roots Moderne players or Roots Moderne, what I call Roots Moderne records, which are people who are playing roots music but pushing the envelope a little on how that music sounds and how what that music can be and how it sounds. And Peter is definitely one of those people. Another reason I wanted to interview him is because we're roughly the same age, and it turns out we were both in London within a few years of each other back in the 60s. We saw some amazing shows, and people like to hear about that kind of thing. So we're going to discuss that. And then we're going to discuss his new record, Mississippi Suitcase, where he does push the envelope of the blues a bit, pays tribute to a guitar player we both love, Peter Green. And also, we discuss how the blues community reacts to people who try and push the envelope and kind of the sad state of that. So buckle up and get ready for a fun interview with Peter Parcek.
Cool.
So we talked. I mean, there's a couple of reasons I wanted to talk to you. I want to talk about the new record because the more I listen to it, the more I like
Thank
it.
you.
And I think it has a place in Guitar Moderne because it's definitely not a retro blues record. It definitely pushes the envelope a bit. But we talked about, we just kind of discussed offline about, or I've heard you talk about the people you saw growing up in England, and we've discussed the fact that we may have been there around the same time.
Yeah.
And I occasionally, I mean, I've mentioned to younger people that I saw Stevie Ray Vaughan live, and they're blown away by that
Oh,
because
yeah.
he died in what, 92 or sometime in the 90s.
Yeah. Sometime in the 90s, I think.
So there's people who were too young to see him back then who are now 30, 35, even
Yeah.
40. But you went to England when, how old were you when you went to England?
Um, I had I had just graduated high school, and that was during Vietnam. And my dad was a Marine, and my mom was had been a Navy uh, wave, I guess.
Yeah,
And
mine too.
so there was, particularly with my father, there was considerable um, conflict around the issue of Vietnam. His thing was you serve and you don't question it. And I was lucky in that we lived, by that point, we lived in Middletown, which was a university town. Wesleyan University is there. And so I had actually gone to Wesleyan as a quote unquote special student while I was in high school for 1 year. And I had met people who were questioning, who were saying this is a different war. This is not, one or two. There's something about this war that is worthy of being questioned. Of course, some people would hotly disagree with that. I'm not trying to get you into any of that. Just so, but it speaks to how I got to England. So my dad and we had a pretty serious falling out over it. I said I wasn't going to go, and I applied to be what they call a conscientious objector, which is kind of an interesting phrase, and you really get put into a box when you try to do that. But my mom was more willing to discuss it and see it from the perspective that it might be different than the conflict that she had been in. And she worked at a hospital teaching children. And one of her one of the fellow teachers, uh, her husband was a businessman who traveled quite a bit, and they had a place in London. And so my mom had asked me, well, what are you going to do if you don't get the conscientious objector status? And the choices at that time were pretty limited, you know, Canada. I mean, the ones we thought of. Canada. I mean, I love Canada. Don't get me wrong, but I didn't know how realistic that was for me. Jail, not something I wanted. And so Mrs. Newman, who was the Joanne Newman, who was the dear friend who worked with my mom, said, "Well, look, we have a place in London. They're predicting that this is going to blow over, that this is going to be resolved. Why don't you have him go there for a period of months and see what happens?" So, which was an amazing offer. And so I actually went for a year. I wasn't able to stay in their place the whole time, but I went for a year. And and this would have been, I'm a little fuzzy on the year, but I'm thinking it must have been, it was, Peter Green had left John Mayall and he had formed Fleetwood Mac. So I think that's either really late 66 or 67. And so I was there for a year.
Okay. So I think you were there before me because when I was there, I saw Fleetwood Mac at a high school gym, and Albatross had just come out as a hit.
Oh, yeah.
And that would have been, but that was 69. So you were
Yeah.
there a couple of years earlier.
Yeah, Mr. Wonderful. I remember when Mr. Wonderful was released.
Right.
And in fact, I remember being in a shop, and this was at the time that they would let you play records in the shop.
Right.
Like you could go and listen. And I remember listening to Stop Messing Around, like an alternate take of Stop Messing Around. Oh my God, Michael, goodness gracious.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You're preaching to the converted. I mean, listening to your record, I could hear how much Peter Green influenced.
Oh, yeah.
The cover of Supernatural notwithstanding, just I hear it in your singing, I hear it some in your playing, but there's definitely an influence there. And he was, as they say, he's the only one who ever scared B.B. King. So he was something. He was very different than Clapton. I mean, for
Yes.
me and probably for you too, the first Blues Breakers record. I mean, Clapton changed the sound of modern guitar, basically. On
Absolutely.
That record.
An incredible achievement, really.
So in that respect, Peter Green he kind of followed in those footsteps, but he was a very different. For me, what the difference was that he left space in the way that the original guys did, in a way that Clapton really kind of didn't. I don't recall Mick Taylor doing it very much either. But Peter Green was the only guitar player who left the same kind of space in his playing that B.B. King did and Albert King did, and to me that added to a certain kind of mystery, which is what drew me to the blues. It wasn't athletics. It wasn't a lot of licks and stuff like that. It was that darkness, that mystery, and that came largely from the space, or as much as anything from the space. So did you get to see Fleetwood Mac, actually the original trio, I guess, play in clubs?
Yes, I did.
Oh my God.
Yes, I did. And to your point, which is a brilliant point, as you well know, he developed that because he didn't have that space initially in his playing. It was more Clapton influenced, and it became more mysterious as it went on. And there was at least one night that I saw where they did a trio set, and then he said, "We have a guest guitarist we're going to bring up." And he came out and pretended to be a different guy. And he played all of that flashy stuff that he played with Mayall. He just showed he could do it for like a song. And it was, obviously it was incredible, but he laughed it off. Like, well, yeah, I could do that, but like, that's not what I want to do.
That's fascinating.
It was incredible to experience. He sort of made fun of it.
Yeah. Well, they had a sense of humor about it, because it's funny, when I saw him at the high school, it was the three guitarists, and at one point Jeremy Spencer left the stage, and they say, "We have a special guest," and they brought him back, and he was wearing a lame suit, and he did Blues Power, by Albert King, and he did all the licks and the stuff, but there was a bit of taking the piss, but
right.
still, he nailed it. I mean, he
Oh yeah.
totally nailed it. And I never really heard Jeremy Spencer play like that. He was the Elmore James guy.
Right. Right.
So so did you get to hear that version of the band also?
Yes, I did. I think I was there maybe before Danny Kerwin actually officially joined. I think I saw him. I can't remember if he was opening that night or if they just brought him up. They mentioned that he was from a band called Boiler House, which I think was his band before he joined Fleetwood Mac. And they brought him up, and he always looked young. I mean, until much later when he
Right.
was not well, but
No, he looked 12.
like child. Yeah,
Yeah.
he looked like a schoolboy.
Yeah.
And they brought him up and he played a slow blues and it was just hair raising.
Yeah.
Now, the weird thing was at that point, I don't know why this was, but when Peter Green would do his songs, at least most of the time that I can remember, Jeremy Spencer would just leave the stage. I mean, he could play, piano, he could play, obviously could play guitar, but he didn't back him up. Like he did his thing and then he left. And then much later, they did this Earl Vince and the Valiants thing
Right.
where he came out in, LeMay and stuff. And they even did a record of it, I think.
Possibly. Yeah, well, I mean, possibly some of that might have been because Peter Green's stuff, it's that space thing again. Some of his stuff was built around just
Right.
leaving holes, which is one thing I loved about Junior Wells and Buddy Guy
Oh, yeah.
and Buddy Guy's trio during the trio era, that that there was never you never got this sense that they felt they needed to fill that space. It was always
Nope.
the space was part of the music. I mean, Fred
Yeah.
Bilo would play jungle drums, not on a slow blues. There was no backbeat thing. It would be like tom toms, and Buddy would just leave. He'd leave the space. At least in those days, I got to see him play at the
Yeah.
Museum of Modern Art's Sculpture Garden, which was
Whoa.
up, on the
Oh, my
roof,
God.
and he kind of danced across. They had little pond with a bridge up there, and he danced across the bridge. I think A.C. Reed was playing saxophone. I don't
Hmm.
remember who the rest of the band was, but that was back the Strat days, and
Yeah.
I mean, once, and it wasn't much longer. I saw him. I was living in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I saw him
Oh, yeah.
some club up around there, and he had switched to the Guild, and he was starting to do his shuck and jive thing for the white boys, and I was
Yep.
out of there.
Yep.
I just couldn't. I was so sad because those early Junior Wells records and A Man in the Blues, and there's a record I
Just
have.
brilliant.
I don't know if you have this. Do you know this? Can you see this record?
I do. And he plays brilliantly on that record.
It's amazing.
Beautifully.
It's like an organ
Yep.
trio with him and Shaky Horton.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just
A
discovered
lot of
that.
people don't know that record. That's a great record.
Yeah, I think I don't even know where I got it or found it. So who else did you see while you were in London?
I saw Jeff Beck with Rod Stewart.
Oh my God! In what
And this
kind
is
of
when
venue?
Rod Stewart was shy.
Yeah, I saw him at the
I mean, like
Fillmore.
literally kind of like back by the amplifiers.
What venue
And
was that?
I can't remember now.
But what you remember, was a club, the side
What I
of a
do
theater?
remember is that the hum, the buzz
Yeah,
from the Marshalls was one of the loudest things I'd ever heard. And someone angered Jeff Beck by kind of, like you said, taking the piss. He had played something in a previous song that was very Buddy Guy-esque. And some guy in the back of the club, who clearly was either a guitar player or a guitar aficionado and was kind of drunk, yelled out, "Who do you think you are, bloody Buddy Guy?" And man, Jeff Beck reacted to it. He was not pleased. And I don't know where he got the extra power because he was already definitely cranking, but it became even louder and even more intense after that. He just sort of laid it down. Not that he hadn't been prior to that, but that was the most memorable. I did see them a couple of times, but that particular time was amazing.
yeah. I saw him at the Fillmore East
Oh.
with Rod Stewart and Nicky Hopkins, and I think it was Mickey Waller on drums by that point. And Rod, once again, I think he spent part of the set behind the amplifiers. But I
Oh,
remember, as much as, I mean, as blown away as I was by the music, what people don't understand is that no one had ever seen a rooster haircut like that before.
I
I mean,
know.
it
I
wasn't
know.
just the music. It's like when I saw Jimmy Page with the Yardbirds at the Anderson Theater, that record that was released and then recalled and then re-released, the
Yeah,
live one.
yeah.
And he was wearing, 1700s British, fop outfit with the lace,
Hmm.
the lace sleeves and the velvet jackets. And these were things we'd
Love it.
never seen before, let alone somebody like strutting the stage like that and running across the stage to step on a fuzz tone for a solo. I mean,
Right.
all of that was mind boggling. Um, and yeah, the thing, I mean, I got to see Led Zeppelin in a club in London that when I was living there. Yeah. I mean,
That I can't blame you have done.
it
That's
was a
cool.
big club, granted. I mean, it was probably a 400 or 500, maybe even 600 seat club. But it was, well, I don't know if it was before or right after the first record came out. And
I
yeah,
love that period of the band too. Love that period.
yeah. So who else did you see while you were in London?
Oh, gee, I saw Chicken Shack a number of times. Stan Webb was a great, great guitar player. Um, and Christine Perfect at that time. Wonderful singer, piano player. Really great band. Um, Ainsley Dunbar had a band that was really cool. There was a guy named John Mooreshead, I believe. Great guitar player. Pretty close to Peter Green in terms of using space as an ally. Played beautifully, great tone. Um, Trying to think of who else. Obviously saw Jimi Hendrix,
In
which
London?
only one time.
In
One
London?
time. He was sitting in.
Oh, okay.
He came and sat in. I can't even remember all the particulars. That was that time, where
Wow. Yeah, that was
we
that
did
time.
things that we don't remember all the details that well. But yeah, unbelievable.
Well, it's like they say, if you
Truly.
lived through if you remember the '60s, you weren't really there. Because I mean, I saw Hendrix. He played my college
Oh, you're
in
kidding.
Stony Brook, and I saw him at
Oh
the
my
Singer Bowl in New York. And I
God.
may have seen him at the Fillmore also, but I don't remember because it was the '60s.
Yes, the time. Yeah.
But and speaking of Chicken Shack, I saw them when I was in London. Back up Freddie King. It's the only time I
Yeah.
ever saw Freddie King, and
Yeah.
I'll never forget. He did this thing where how he wore his guitar like not
Yes.
over his neck, but just off one shoulder,
Right.
and he
Hmm.
was playing something, an instrumental or something, and he played it. He dropped the guitar to the floor, kicked it right on the beat, hit the right note, rang the note, yanked it back up, and continued playing. And it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
He was amazing. My God.
Did you
I
get to
mean, his
see him?
voice would be
Yeah.
enough. His voice would be
Yeah.
enough. I did, but not there. I saw him here later when I came home.
Well, that was the
Um,
thing with all those guys. I mean, Freddie King, BB King, Albert King. You take away the guitar playing, and they're all great singers, which
Amazing.
brings me
Amazing.
to, I mean, you are one of the few
Oh,
blues artists, white blues artists, I have to say it, that plays great guitar and can
oh,
sing. I mean, that's one thing that has put me off. Plenty of guys can play, but I always think about it, in the old days, Jimmy Page could play, Jeff Beck could play. They didn't think they could sing, so they hired singers. And
hmm.
I don't know if it's economics or ego or what, but at some point it became that every guy who plays electric blues had to sing.
Right.
He felt he had to sing whether he could or it couldn't. But in your case, fortunately, you can't. So it sounds
Well,
great.
I feel like I'm learning, really, because I mean, it's gone from really not so good to now at least I don't have to run to the bathroom when I hear myself sing.
Well, listening to
Really
yourself
the
is
key
also
is
always something different, than
the key is s- staying within what you can do. At least for me, I would love to be Otis Rush vocally, but I'm not. I even tried for a while. I tried to get some of those those shifts in pitch and but it just sounded mannered. So I don't always succeed in it, but I'm trying to just sing who I am, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. I mean, there are
Not
guys who
not
do that. Yeah.
not false, not false. I have been excoriated by people for not having more, melismatic uh, filigrees in my, presentation. It's just not. I don't feel like I could do it well enough to justify it. So I just feel like sing your heart, and hopefully, it'll reach,
Well, it's
it'll
less
reach
about
people.
that for me than the quality of your voice, the quality of the sound. I mean, that's something you kind of either have or you don't. I mean, there are even great singers. Like Todd Rundgren for me is a great singer.
Oh yeah.
He doesn't have a great voice. It's not a
Hmm.
great sounding instrument, but he's such a great singer that, and everything, the whole package works. And there are plenty of people who who maybe aren't great singers or great singers in the sense of being melismatic. That's what I'm thinking, or having that kind of wild vocal control,
Hmm.
but who
Right.
have a sound, and you have a sound, that works for the blues and works with your guitar playing, and you know it to me that's the most important thing. But getting back
Thank
to
you.
London for a minute, because I know for some reason people are fascinated about this.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Did you
cool.
go to the Marquee at all? Did you see anybody at the
I
Marquee?
actually played at the Marquee.
Oh wow.
I didn't deserve to, believe me. I did not deserve it. Um, yeah, I wasn't even playing guitar at that time. I mean, I was trying, but I was so intimidated by the people I saw. I was playing harmonica and singing. And mostly I think because I was American, I was getting over okay. And I played with a group of guys. The guitar players were far better than I was. A guy named Stan Cross, and I don't know if you remember a band called Gentle Giant.
Oh sure.
Yeah, so there was a guy in that band called Gary Green. His brother Jeff Green was in this band. So it was Stan Cross and Jeff Green. The Green brothers, that is Jeff and Gary, or Gaz as they sometimes call him, they would play Hideaway together behind their heads in harmony, like just insane, so good on melody makers. Like those little, one or two pickup Gibson guitars, student guitars, just tear it up. Jeff was a little more jazzy. He knew lots of chords. I mean, way beyond what most of the guys I knew at that time had together. He had that all under his fingers. And Stan Cross was a beautiful guitar player, a little bit in the Buddy Guy zone. Um, and we started to get gigs mostly because it was the blues boom. And, if you were a blues band, you got lucky at that point. And I was American. That kind of helped, I guess. So we opened, I can't remember who we opened for, but, we played a short set at the Marquee. But yes, I used to go to the Marquee. I loved the Marquee. And so it was a huge honor to go in there and even play for whatever it was, 35 minutes or something. Um,
It's interesting that you say you got over partly because you're American, because I remember when I was in London, I saw this blues band, and they started with the guitar player singing, and he was a great singer. But then they brought out this black gentleman, to be their front man, who was Jamaican,
yeah,
and
yeah.
really was not a great blues singer. But
Hmm.
because he was black, there was the thing. So I just found that really amusing. But I mean, you are a really good singer, so I'm not surprised.
Thank you.
I'm sure it wasn't just that you were American that got you over. I think I saw Terry Reid at the Marquee. I
Oh,
think
God.
that was
Yeah.
the one time I went, and saw him a couple of times
Speaking
after
of
that.
great singers, oh my
Oh
goodness.
my God, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
saw him a bunch. I saw him at the Scene in New York, Steve Paul's Scene, and I saw him open for the Stones, although it was at the Madison Square Garden, so it could have been anybody down there. from where I
Mm-hmm.
was sitting, and also once at the bitter end in New York,
Oh,
during that when he made the River record with David
yeah,
Lindley,
yeah.
although David Lindley wasn't on that gig. Um, yeah, I also got to go down to the Isle of Wight. Like when I
Oh
land
my God.
the festival, it was the one with Dylan and
Yeah.
yeah, and the band, and that was I guess their big reunion thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that was amazing. I mean, I was there for 2 days. What I remember of those 2 days is, there was him. I remember the Who did Tommy, uh,
Ooh.
and uh, and Bloodwind Pig played. I remember
Oh
them.
yeah.
The
I like Mick Abrams a lot.
Bonzo Dog Band played.
Oh,
Were
you're kidding.
hilarious. But the
Yeah.
most amazing thing I tell people about that in the 2 days, the biggest hand for anybody on stage was for Tom Paxton.
Really?
Yes, and at which point many people go, "Who?" And I go, "Exactly." I mean, he was a
Great. No, he
folk
was
singer, but he was a folk singer in the
boxing.
'60s that kind of disappeared, that nobody really thinks about today. But at that time, he must have
Tremendous
been
though.
huge in England. And yeah, I just wanted to. Pentangle played at that also.
Oh man.
Um,
Love that band.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I guess Danny Thompson was with them on bass at that time, and subsequently saw him
Tremendous.
with Richard Thompson a bunch, and not in
Who's
England.
and that was another group I saw. I saw Fairport.
Oh, in England?
Really early Fairport
Wow.
when Richard had curls and a
Yeah,
gold, I think.
yeah,
Amazing. Truly amazing. I mean, he's still amazing, but
yeah,
little different tonally because of the gold top, I think, but just great.
yeah. There's
And
recordings of
vocals
them.
were brilliant too. But then they had a tragic accident, I think.
Well, Sandy Den.
I did one of the members.
Well, I'm trying to remember if that Sandy Denny. Was she the singer? No, I can't remember. But yes, I'm pretty sure they did have an accident and
Hmm.
somebody died. Yeah, I mean, that's I tell people that's the advantage of being our age is we got to see a lot of these guys. Like I mean,
Right.
in my college, Howling Wolf played in the college dorm,
Oh, oh
so
man.
so
Oh my
I
goodness.
got to see him up close and personal and
Unbelievable.
things like that. And I'm sure. Well, let's bring you back to the States because I know around when you got back and were living in Massachusetts, you got to see a lot of amazing people around there also as well, didn't you?
I did, yeah. They bumped me out of England for playing without a permit. I was working.
Well, their union was
And
really strong about that. I mean, they only gave me four. What did they give me? No, when I came back, I went to England, then I went to Amsterdam and was there for 6 weeks. When I came,
love
when I
Amsterdam.
landed the first time, I said I was just visiting, and so they gave
Hmm.
me like 4 months or something. Or,
Right.
but when I came back from Amsterdam, I made the mistake of writing on the card that I was a musician, and they gave me like 2 weeks. I ended up staying 4 months,
Hmm. Hmm.
but yeah, their
Yep.
their union was really strong, and they didn't want
Really
people
strong.
working.
I wasn't exactly subtle about it.
Yeah, what are you gonna
But
do?
yeah, when I came back, the adjustment was really difficult. The United States looked very different after being in London. Um, and the conflict was still going. The war was still going. Um, but the upside is that a lot of those, geniuses that we both adore were still alive and they were still playing. And there was a club. I was actually living in Connecticut at that point. There was a club in Willimantic called Shabu Inn.
Sure.
A guy named Lefty Foster ran that club. And so they would book, James Cotton with Matt Murphy, Buddy and Junior, Freddie King, Albert Collins. I saw Albert King. I can't remember if it was at Shabu or not, but I definitely saw him. Muddy Waters, I think I saw in Cambridge, Mass. I think. Um, and Paul Butterfield, the early iterations of the Paul Butterfield band. Um, So yeah, I would go to see all of those people that I could, and total luck, when I was living in Connecticut in the same town as Wesleyan, they brought Skip James to do one one show. And this was on many levels an incredible highlight. I mean, first of all, because of his voice, amazing guitar playing and tunings, but also because he had an artistic sense of himself, and people were talking when he was playing, and he didn't have any amplification. There was no PA, nothing. So he's in this room. It's a beautiful room on the campus, but people are talking and their voices are echoing when he's trying to play. He stops and he begins playing again, and people go right back to talking. And clearly he was not happy about it. And he said, this is a paraphrase, but he includes several of the words because they stuck with me. Mr. Skip would appreciate it if you wouldn't be perambulating when he's expressing his art. And he eventually actually got up and walked out of that room. They had to convince him to come back.
Wow.
They had to tell everybody, if you want to hear Mr. James, you are going to have to zip it. And he came back and he played piano. They had a piano in the room. He played the filthiest song he could have possibly played. And what couldn't have been by mistake. He played a version of All Night Long, but it had every lyric that he probably had suppressed, in front of white crowds. He let it all rip. And it was beautiful to see. And man, I don't know, I didn't get to see him at the 30s, but if he had lost a step, I didn't see it. Just incredible, man.
That's really interesting because it's very unusual. I mean, a lot of those guys grew up playing in juke joints and stuff like that, and they're used to playing for North. But it's not surprising because when going back to the mystery again, I mean, he's one of the darkest, most mysterious, gentlemen of that genre. So it was
without a doubt. Do you know who managed him? Was it Dick Waterman?
I'm not sure if Dick. I mean, Dick seems like he managed everybody in those days.
You're right. Right.
But yeah, I got to meet him. Fortunately, through our mutual friend Ted, we went to
Yeah.
we went
Cool.
down to Oxford and got to have dinner with him, which was great. And he's responsible for us seeing a lot of those people. I mean, I used to go to the Cafe A Go Go and see
Me too.
people like
I love
Bill,
that
Big
place.
Joe Williams, and I think I saw Reverend Gary Davis, Brownie McGee, and Sonny Terry. I saw a double bill of the Blues Project and the Butterfield Band there.
Oh,
That was
yes.
the loudest thing I had ever heard to date. But later I got to see, it was fascinating, I got to see the Butterfield Band with horns at the Fillmore East.
Yes.
And I was outside. I don't know if you ever went there. They used to let you were waiting outside behind the doors to go in when the first show was going on. So I
So you
heard
could
a lot
hear
of the
it.
first show through there, and they sounded just like the record, and they were killing. Buzzy Feeten was amazing. And then they
Amazing.
must have gone backstage and imbibed certain substances or something. Because when I went in for that second show, I think it might have been brilliant because, I mean, Philip Wilson became an avant-garde drummer. Dave Sanborn was the sax player. Buzzy is an amazing player. So they took that stuff out. But I didn't know what they were doing. I just knew they're doing something really interesting here. And I wish I'd known then what I know now musically, so I could have appreciated it more. But the Cafe A Go Go was the place. I mean, I hitched in once I was going to Stony Brook at the time out in the island. We used to hitch into the city or take the train and tell them we lost our tickets or do stuff like that. But I came in once because there was a jam session with Eric Clapton. The only time I ever saw Eric Clapton, Larry Coryell, Elvin Bishop, and Frank Zappa.
Oh my God.
With the Butterfield rhythm section. And Clapton had just permed his hair and was playing The Fool SG.
Yep.
And the only Clapton I knew was the guy on the cover of the Blues Breakers. So I'm thinking,
Sure.
is this really Eric Clapton, or did they just bring in somebody and they're calling him Eric Clapton? Until, of course, he started playing.
Hmm.
But the guitar hero of that night was Frank Zappa. I
Oh
mean,
God, yeah.
he sounded
Amazing.
amazing. And I'm not a Zappa fan. I'm not particularly enamored of his
Hmm.
music, but his guitar playing just blew me away. So I
Yeah.
want to get into your style of playing. I mean, as we said at the beginning, you do update the blues, and I was wondering if you've had any pushback about that from the blues community over the years,
Yes.
and how you've dealt with it. Well, because are you familiar with Rick Holmstrom's Hydraulic Groove
I
record?
love Rick Holmstrom and I love that record.
I love that record, and I saw that band twice. I mean, they played in New York, and then
Oh, you saw them?
yeah, I drove. Well, the first band where he had these young kids who one was playing sax, another one was playing keyboards and doing all the samples, and they
Yeah.
were just killer players, and they
Oh,
played
yeah.
it just like the record. And so I drove out to that club in Hartford, the Blues Club out there, and saw them again. And then, but by the next time he came through New York, I knew those kids weren't going to stay with him for blues money,
Right.
because they could
Sure.
obviously play anything. And so they went off, and he was triggering the loops himself the second time. And it was just a three-piece, and it still sounded great. And I love Rick. Or I don't know if you remember that Chris Thomas King record,
I love Chris Thomas King.
but he did that
Amazing.
one record with a lot of hip hop stuff on it, and then
Yep. Yep.
tossed that aside and went back to playing, pretty straight ahead. So I was
Mhm.
curious what you experienced and what your reaction to trying to update the genre has been.
Well, I think at least for me, it comes back to the same thing as singing, trying to stay within what's true for you. Um, I mean, I knew I wasn't. I can always speak for myself. I wasn't going to be Howling Wolf or Muddy Waters, even though I put them on the highest pedestal. BB King and all those folks. But I knew I couldn't be that. I wanted to be that, but I knew I couldn't. So the more honest way for me was to, if I did something that I didn't write, to adapt it or twist it or whatever term you want to use, but bring it to where I could feel it was honest for me to do it. And, some people applaud that. They can feel it and they hear it and they respect it because they can tell it's coming from a place of respect. Other people are like, well, it doesn't sound like the real thing to me because it's not the same as, X. Like, just for example, on Mississippi Suitcase, there's a song called Everybody Ought to Make a Change by Sleepy John Estes. Well, that song's been done a fair amount. I mean, Taj Mahal did a killer version of it with Jesse Edwin Davis that's a little more like a Howlin' Wolf groove. And Eric Clapton has done it. And I knew I couldn't try to do it like any of those people. Certainly not like John. I mean, that voice alone, it's like, so I just, it's hard for me to describe this process because it's a little mysterious to me too. I had been playing the song kind of like John Estes. And then in the midst of that, I started playing this arpeggio. And I had my Swart Atomic Space Tone and I turned on the reverb like probably way too much and the tremolo really strongly. And suddenly this thing started like pulsating in a really interesting way. And I started to feel like, well, that feels like me. And I love the lyric. I feel like that lyric is so profound, so evocative that I'd been wanting to sing it. I just didn't want to be aping anybody else, mimicking anybody else. So for me, that's what it comes down to. It has to feel, I don't know if this makes any sense, it has to feel right to me, almost morally right. Like I'm not copying somebody's thing. Not that I haven't done it or tried, but
Mhm.
just like have it be who you are. And so, yeah, sometimes people push back against that. I adore traditional blues music. I do. I love it. I played as a backing guitar player to a lot of really great, or opened for a lot of really great traditional blues artists. In fact, when I played with Pinetop Perkins, after the first set, he came up to me and he said, "Why aren't you playing? I know you can play. Why aren't you playing?" And I said, "Because see that crowd, they're all here for you. The place was sold out." I said, "They didn't come for me. They came for you. You're a legend. I'm honored to be on the stage with you." He said, "No, that's great. That's all great." But he said, I hope it's okay to swear, but I like it
Sure.
when the guitar player gets up my ass. It's a direct quote. I like it. He said, "When I look at you, I want you to play." And on that tour, we got pushback from traditional blues fans. And he stood up for me every time. In fact, I can't even tell you the story because I'll start crying. He stood up for me in places where people were telling him to get rid of me, get rid of these guys. He's like, "No, I like what they're doing. They're pushing me." He didn't use that word,
Yeah.
but he actually liked, because he was so secure. He knew I am a badass. You know what I mean? Like he
Right.
was. He was a total badass. I mean, he had a different suit and a different woman every night. Every night. It's like, come on. He's sort of what everybody aspired to. He was it in the flesh. Anyway, so that's just by way of saying I adore traditional music. Maybe if I could do it better or what I felt was more authentically, I would. But it seems like even when I try, like I tried with Until My Love Comes Down, but it still comes out twisted somehow. I don't
Right.
know why. It just comes out twisted. So I just have to accept that. That's who and what I am, I guess. And it's the way I hear it. I hear it, I guess, in a different way. I mean, it doesn't mean I don't love, the original thing. I do. I feel like we're all actually standing on those geniuses' shoulders. I couldn't play a note. I mean, if I hadn't learned, from records and seeing people, first solo I learned was Waiting on You by B.B. King from Blues is King. I couldn't play anything if I hadn't learned that. And then Crosscut Saw by Albert King. And then, swaths of things by Buddy Guy and Otis Rush and on and on and on. So I adore it, but, for whatever reason, I guess I went bad somewhere, and that's who I am.
Well, that's funny you put it that way because the nicest thing anybody ever said to me about my playing was the wife of a guitar player I was playing with at this gig. She came up to me and said, "You play just like you are," and that's the secret. I mean, that's if you don't, I mean, you're only going to be a second-rate version of the original at
Bingo.
best, and
Exactly.
it's to try and play that traditional stuff, leaving aside the whole "we didn't live it" thing. Just
Hmm.
if you try and learn it, you can play it note for note. I mean, this is a whole conversation about finding your own voice that is kind of a bête noire of mine. But I'm curious, have you found any kind of change over the years of playing in terms of whether there's more or less pushback? I mean, I know when I toured with James Armstrong, the older fans, they just wanted to hear "Sweet Home Chicago" and "Hey Hey the Blues is All Right" all night, and
Right.
or yeah, the younger guys just wanted to hear Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix all night.
Yes. Right.
So, I
Right.
mean, have you noticed in terms of does it differ depending on where you're playing or the age group or over the years? Has any of that changed?
I feel like it's gotten more inclusive, not less. I feel like there's a widening in a way, which is almost inevitable, because we have such a limited number of the original beings still alive, and I mean, of course, not right now because of COVID, but who are able to tour. Uh, Buddy Guy comes to mind, and there's obviously a number of others, but I think it's wide. I feel like it's widened out. Rock is definitely part of it now. I mean, at least in a lot of circles, rock is part of it, and or at least it's accepted more than it was. Like you can turn your even if you don't quote unquote play rock guitar, you can turn your guitar up, and you don't get lambasted for that. I think the difference though is when I came here to Massachusetts, the first couple of guys I saw, I stumbled into a club where Hubert Sumlin was playing up here. And then I can't remember if it was with Ronnie Earl or with Duke Robillard. And then I would go see both of those guys, Duke Robillard and Ronnie Earl. And they were both, and still are, but both really attuned to dynamics. And so I'm probably overstating this because it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, but I feel like there could be more dynamics in what's going on. I love pedal to the metal, let's go on 10, but at some point, particularly where the song or the emotion warrants it, it's really powerful and it's necessary to actually bring that back in terms of numbers of notes, but also just in terms of volume level and even tone. And I feel like that's maybe, I'm not saying it's a lost art, but that's something I feel like it's essential. And
Absolutely. I mean, it's and the crazy thing is that it's such an audience pleaser when you do it right. People love
right.
it. I mean, when you reach a peak and then the band breaks it down to nothing and you start. I mean, I can't tell you how many nights James used to do that on the road and the place would go crazy, and then just start doing the volume swell thing and dynamics is another thing that's missing. Well, what's interesting about your record and your playing is you get that. I found it interesting. You get a rock tone, you get a more distorted tone,
right,
but
right.
it never descends into blues hammer sound. For those in the audience that don't know what blues hammer is, I think Ted Drozowski introduced me to that as a term for a certain kind of music. I saw, if you've ever seen Ghost World, and you should, the movie, which is great. Steve Buscemi plays this blues fanatic, and some friend of his takes him to see a band because they know he likes blues, and the band is up there playing just that rock sound. It's a blues progression, but it's a total rock, almost metal sound. And I think their name is Blues Hammer, if I'm not mistaken, is the name of the band. And so that has apparently become a term for a certain kind of blues players and I see a lot of young guys doing it. They crank the guitar up and they play loud and fast, almost continuously, and they've learned the basic blues licks and that's what they play. But it's tricky when you start distorting the guitar to not descend into that, and somehow you get a fairly distorted sound, but still maintain a certain sort of what sounds like pick dynamics and stuff. So I'm curious, how do you get your distortion? Do you use a pedal or the amp or a combination thereof?
Well, a lot of it is that what I'm trying for. I'm not saying I've gotten there, but what I'm trying for is more Willie Johnson and Pat Hare, and somewhat the sound that I heard Buddy Guy get early on, where it's driven and it even maybe sounds like the amp is gonna like give up, but it doesn't get to the blues hammer level of saturation. It's a different kind of saturation. It's almost like the amp itself is crying for help, if that makes any sense. But
well, there's a lot more low end on it than you get. It's not so mid-range focused. So are you just driving the amp, or are you using something to drive it a little further? Or
in the particular case of Mississippi Suitcase, that record, we used amps that we drove And then when we needed a little more, um, the engineer, whose name is Ducky Carlisle, brilliant guy, has worked a lot with Tom Hambridge. I actually on a number of Buddy Guy records, the modern Buddy Guy records. He's got a Klon Centaur, but there's that mythic Klon Centaur that's sort of the idealized version of it. Ducky's got one of those. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's tolerance of components or if Bill Finnegan just gave him a magic one. I don't know, but it's like what you would actually want if you bought that box. You'd want it to be able to do what this does, and it seems to do it effortlessly. You can still hear the amplifier. You can still hear the pick attack. You can still hear the tone of the guitar. It just it pushes it that much further, either towards that kind of Willie Johnson, Pat Hare land, or the land where the amp is crying for mercy. Because I'm not wanting blues hammer distortion. I'm not hearing that in my ear, but I am hearing something that I think is exciting. Which maybe in the old days people would get by slashing their speaker or by pulling tubes out or something. Sort of going for, I know this sounds very retro, but that's kind of what I'm going for. Even if I've got a pedal engaged, I'm trying to achieve that excitement. Like if you've heard that Cotton Crop Blues, James Cotton with Pat Hare on it, oh my goodness, that tone. And I have a live recording of Buddy Guy at Shabu. He had moved to the Guild, but he was still playing the Basement. And the Basement was not in good shape. In fact, the tweed a lot of it was off, and he had some kind of like faux covering. It wasn't tweed. I don't know what it was. And the tubes were not all good. And he would hit it with his fist, and then it would do right for some weird reason. But anyway, that tone that he got, sometimes that's in my ear too. That's a little more driven than even the Willie Johnson, Pat Hare thing, but I guess what I'm stumbling to say is it's more what the star you're aiming for is. If you're aiming for something, even if you don't get it all the time, but you're hearing something that's more articulate, it's driven, but it's more articulate and it has dynamics. It isn't all compressed out, so you can still hear the pick. Yeah, but that is a tricky one for sure, and you can easily go over the line. I
don't hear you going over the line.
We've all gone over the line,
Do you have the gain rolled back on the Klon? I mean, that tends to help.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. In fact, Ducky will come up while I'm playing and go like, nah, and he'll put it way back to like 8 o'clock or 9.
Right.
Like we don't need any more than that. Right. It's doing just fine. Because I don't know if this ever happens to you, but you can get insecure while you're playing and think, I need more of that. I need that to be really, but you actually don't if you go the other direction. Because then there's still the dynamic and there's still, in a weird way, I know this probably doesn't make any sense, but there's still space. There's still that space that you were talking about with Peter Green. There's still that can still be your ally. Whereas if you make it too saturated, you can't really rely on that anymore because it's all compressed. You've lost any dynamic that you had. Yeah. And then it's hard to make any kind of statement. You can't make a statement like that.
Well,
not
you can't.
When you listen to more than 12 bars,
Yeah, you can't. I mean, you can't articulate. You can't.
Right.
And you can't express yourself with the way you play and how hard and how soft you hit, and it's just a whole other level of expression that you don't get once you get past a certain compression point with the overdrive.
Now, what's tricky is that's all well and good in the studio, but at least where I am, and I'm guessing where you are, clubs don't want you to turn the amps up to that point anymore. Right. they're not as accepting of that.
Right.
So it makes it a lot more challenging to get that tone. So I keep getting smaller and smaller with the amplifier,
That's what you have to do.
just tiny. Like I did a thing last week of this sort, and I have it's not mine, but I've had it for 3 years. It's a tweed Princeton, and man, that thing sounds great. But like something that small, or the little Swart uh, space tone, the one that's like 5 watts into an 8-inch speaker, something like that, where you can wind it up and then you can roll your guitar volume back. You've got more possibilities there. But it's definitely more challenging when you can't push the amp, because if you're relying too much, which I've been guilty of, when you rely too much on pedals, then you can get into that realm that straddles the dreaded blues hammer, and you really, got to really be careful of that.
Well, yeah. I mean, fortunately, I've made a study of the pedals, and there are pedals that will basically let you do what you're doing with that small amp and are dynamically sensitive. I mean, that to me is a big judgment factor when I get a pedal. Is will it clean up when I back off or not? And there are certain ones where they'll do that, and if you I mean, I've always been, I grew up playing in Manhattan for the most part. So I always had to be able to get a sound at low volume. And
Hmm.
when when I toured, my first real professional tour was with the Sheraton Hotel show band, and we had to
Oh
play
yeah,
everything from Autumn Leaves to Smoke on the Water, but we had to play
yeah.
Smoke on the Water at a volume that diners could hear themselves over.
Hmm.
So thank God for the MXR, distortion pedal that came out at that point, because I was
Yeah.
touring with a twin, and that pedal basically, and that's what I always found the solution for me was finding that kind of pedal. I mean, there's nothing, no, in the studio, there's nothing better, and live, assuming it's mic'd up properly, there's nothing better than getting that sound out of the amp itself. But the pedal manufacturers have come a long way. Like JHS makes a thing called a Super Bolt that basically sounds like an overdriven silver tone. And there's a bunch of pedals that will do that kind of thing. I mean, one reason I love Jetter pedals is because they're not overly compressed. That
Hmm.
they will break up, but they don't do super compressed. Now the thing is, and I'm sure you know this, to play like that, you have to be able to play. That
Right.
compression, that overdriven compression makes up for a lot of sins in terms of,
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
articulation and playing and cleanliness. But speaking of playing loud, I heard you talk on, I guess you were talking on Everybody Loves Guitar with Craig about
Yeah.
superstition.
He's a great guy.
Yeah,
Very
and you were
cool.
saying it was a great interview, and you were saying on superstition, supernatural, you couldn't get that feedback by turning up loud enough because of your circumstances, so you used an EBO, and it sounds great. I mean, you nailed the whole feeling of that tune like that. But I mean, I'm just curious. You still couldn't get that sound by taking a smaller amp and just standing really close to it and doing it, or was it
Well, it,
proximity
it was
issues?
one of these things where Ducky Carlisle had this reissue Les Paul, and he had this amazing Marshall, and he was convinced, okay, we'll do it, we'll get it in like 10, 15 minutes,
Right.
and we'll be
Yeah.
fine. So let's just use the real shit. Yeah, let's use this. And so we opened the doors. I was in proximity to it, and it was sounding great. But once you get into that, then there's the whole thing of, well, this piece is a mountain. Like you really, as we were discussing earlier, you don't want to imitate it because it doesn't need me. It's great on its own. So it's, well, how can I find something my own way with it? And by the time I started to find my own way with it, his neighbors were ready to find their way with us.
Right.
They were
Right.
not happy because he had neighbors like right here and here.
Yeah.
And man, you're right. we should have thought of it and started with a little amplifier, but we didn't. We
Right.
started with a Marshall. So we've got this Marshall, like, and it had been heating up like overnight, so it was perfect. It wasn't too trebly. It was perfect. The only thing that wasn't perfect is they wanted to kill us,
Right.
and me specifically, because I was the source of the noise. So, yeah, I mean, if we had thought a little bit, we would have planned differently and used a Princeton, but we didn't. He had a perfectly great Brown Deluxe that would have been amazing for that, but we
So
sort of started here.
were you overdubbing this?
Um, we had it was specifically the long sustains that we
Right.
were overdubbing, and then there were some solo bits too because I initially had sort of played through it and it was a little too close to the original, so now we can't. So then, and I don't know about you, but I am terribly self-critical. So, at a certain point, Ducky's like, well, okay, let's just do it from the top then. Just do the whole darn thing over again. And, by that point, we'd probably been hitting his neighbors for a while. And, I'm sure they didn't want to hear an F note anymore.
One thing I love about the original is that they push up the reverb as
Yes.
the thing sustains, which is just so cool.
It is
in
so cool.
In general, on this record, did you play your solos with the band, or did you do any and then overdub rhythm, or did you play the rhythm with the band and then overdub solos? Or because there's two guitars on a lot of it.
Yeah, wherever possible, we kept the live solos, and then I would add rhythm guitar in to it. Or if we wanted to double the rhythm guitar part, sometimes we did that. Like on Everybody Ought to Make a Change, because we wanted the pulsations from the tremolo to sort of, meet each other and do unpredictable things. But generally, it's live, unless we had to do it over for some reason. But the vocals, though, were all pretty much overdubbed later because we were playing too loudly to, I mean, I did, we kept some of it, but most of it, I could sing it better later,
Right. So you were singing reference vocals while you were recording.
Yeah,
the track.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love the way
We also-
you. I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I love the way you find the blues in unlikely covers like Eleanor Rigby and "Waiting for My Man." I mean, "Waiting for My Man" kind of makes a certain kind of sense. I mean, it's the subject matter and the and it's got. I mean, a one chord groove is common to blues, but Eleanor Rigby, I was amazed at how well that worked as a blues.
That song actually I had played with the bassist who's on the record, Mark Hickox. We'd played it years before, and at that point we were playing it more like "The In Crowd" by Ramsey Lewis, sort of in that zone. And then I started hearing it a little differently. I think it actually went differently than it was in my inner ear, but yeah, I'm really happy with it. I did get pushback from one reviewer about it, but in general, what are you going to do? But,
Well, it's also. I mean, first of all, I mean, Mark Pucci, right?
I love Mark
The
Pucci.
publicist. I love Mark. I mean, he was a great
He's a
guy.
sweetheart.
When I first started playing with James, he had 2 weeks to get publicity out for that first tour, and there was something in every paper. I think he was great about that.
He is. He's
But
amazing.
he still sends me like I've produced a couple of the later James records, but even after I stopped, I didn't really produce the last one. But he was sending me all the reviews of
Yeah.
the records, and I'm sorry, but the writing of the blues reviewers and the knowledge of the blues reviewers. And I mean, I understand nobody gets paid for that. And as Confucius say, you pay
Right.
peanuts, you get monkeys. And
Right.
so,
Right.
I don't expect a lot, but I mean, even at that, I was appalled at the low quality of the writing. And plus, I think it's a lack of knowledge too. If you think about it, I was just thinking as we're talking, yeah, Eleanor Rigby is an unusual thing for a straight blues or quote unquote straight blues artist to do. But, the kind of bluesy hard bop guys have been doing that for years. I mean, it would be nothing for
Right.
Grant Green to do
Exactly.
Eleanor Rigby, and it would be
Exactly.
bluesy as hell.
Yeah.
So it's to not understand that's part of the, not to mention that I'm sure most of them don't realize that all their blues heroes like Robert Johnson and all those acoustic blues guys used to play any kind of music the people wanted to hear. They were probably
That's
playing
right.
show tunes if they knew it and the people wanted to hear it. They would play anything. It's like Doc Watson, I mean, he was discovered playing a Les Paul, playing rockabilly stuff, but
Right. Right.
it's this narrow view of what's right and what's wrong, and I certainly wouldn't take any of that to heart. Are there any new blues artists that you've heard that you think are pushing the envelope at all and doing anything interesting?
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, fantastic Negrito.
Yeah, I know
Dig the
Ted's a
stuff
big
he's
fan. Yeah.
um there's this guy is actually both a gypsy guitarist and a blues guy. His name is Gonzalo Bergara, Argentinian, phenomenal, just phenomenal musician. Really admire him. This guy isn't strictly a blues guy, but I love Jim Campolongo. I
Oh
love the
yeah,
stuff that he does.
I know Jim for years.
Um, because there's a lot of Roy. There's a lot of Roy Buchananisms in there, mixed with a lot of other things. Um, there's so many greats. I mean, I love Kirk Fletcher, Josh Smith, all these guys, Eric Gales. Um, I like Larkin Poe. You know, there's a bunches of people I like. It's hard to know with the COVID situation when things will open up so we can actually go out and play again, tour again. So I just hope I still get to do that. That I'm not too old by the time it opens up, or
Yeah,
don't want to go. You know what I mean? Or just don't want to go out there anymore. Because
you,
I'm really skittish about it. I've turned down a bunch of possible gigs. Just doesn't seem safe to me.
yeah,
Still,
stay skittish, my friend. I mean,
uh,
it's we want to be around when it does
yeah,
happen, and it's I know it's rough. I know I see people in Nashville that just can't take it anymore, and I see them. They're going into studios and recording, and they're
right,
playing live, even in clubs.
yeah,
And JD Simo is a
yeah.
friend of
He's
mine.
great.
Yeah,
He's
he
great.
had COVID early on. He got it, but he
Oh, I
got
didn't
through
know
it.
that.
Yeah, which is
Oh my
great.
God.
But yeah, we all have to be careful. Are you planning to doing any kind of online performances or anything like that?
What I did is there's a studio up here called Q Division, really great studio in Somerville, Mass. And they figured out a system where I could be in an ISO booth and they could still film it so it doesn't feel funny. And so the band's like right there, the rhythm section's there, and I'm in the ISO booth. So it won't be live, but it was all recorded live.
Right.
We're just kind of this is a lot more involved than I realized before I started to do this, but now we're into the whole thing of camera angles and all this other stuff, and sounds, and so I don't know exactly when it'll be ready, but I did that, and hopefully I'll do some more. I did get an option to do one at a venue, so hopefully we'll also do that. But that's the only indoor thing I've done, other than in here.
Right. Right. Well,
But,
I mean, even in there, I mean, a lot of people are just. I don't know if you how much solo playing you do, but a lot of people are doing it. The live streaming thing. a lot of that is, it's called live streaming, but it's not. It's basically pre-recorded and just
Right.
streamed at a particular time that one time. I just watched an amazing show the other night from Norway, a couple of bands from Norway, but both had been pre-recorded, and in that way the sound is great. I think the Village Vanguard was trying to do live
I
streaming for
saw
a little
Bill
while.
Frisell.
Yeah, I saw that show, the one
Amazing.
too, and but they gave up. I guess they were just
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah,
Oh no.
because there's too many people. If you're asking people to pay,
Right.
it's too many people. If they have a bad connection or something, and you can't be, I guess you can't be responsible for everybody's internet connection all over the world. And so if
Sure.
you're asking them
Sure.
to pay and they can't watch it, they're going to be really upset. So
Yeah.
the
Oh, that's
what
a
seems,
shame.
yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, what it makes it. It's not that different than just shooting it and then broadcasting it. In which case,
Right.
it's much easier. People can watch it at their leisure, and you can
Yeah.
still get people to pay for it. I paid for this, Norwegian show.
Who were the
Yeah,
bands?
it was this woman, Hedvig Molstad. She's amazing guitar player from Norway. She has
Oh, I
a
need to see it.
trio. Well, you can still see it until midnight tonight. It's at
Oh, cool.
if you look at my Facebook page, or if I don't know if you subscribe to Guitar Moderne,
Yeah, yeah.
if you look at or you look at the Guitar Moderne Facebook page, I show where you can go to see it, because she's amazing. But the incredible thing is Ivan Arset. I don't know if you've ever heard his stuff, but his
Oh,
band, there are only a few bands of people that have been playing together for a decade or more that are on the musicianship level of this band. It's kind of they kind of do, it's two drummers, bass and guitar, a lot of
ooh,
electronics,
ooh.
and he's a brilliant player. They're all brilliant players, and they've been playing together for a decade. I mean, it's like the Paul Motion band with Bill
Yeah, yeah.
Frisell. It doesn't sound anything like that, but those guys played together for 20 years. And when you get guys at that level of technical and musical accomplishment who have played together for that long and are musical, really highly musical, that to me is the best music in the world. I mean, that's the best thing ever to see.
Mm.
So it's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, I hope to be checking out, streams or videos, that you're going to be putting out. And I hope you stay safe. It will, this too shall pass at some point. It may be a
Yeah.
year, maybe 2 years. We just got to try and stay healthy, because I'd like to get out there and see stuff and play again too. And we all would, but you don't want to get this thing. So,
No, everything I've heard, you don't want to get it.
yeah.
And we're still discovering aspects of it, that none of which are good. So,
Well, thanks so much for doing this, Peter. And
oh man, thanks for having me. I'm truly honored. I love what you do. I love the way you play,
oh, thank
particularly.
you.
And also I love this concept you've got. This What a great thing. And I'm stunned that you had me on it, and I'm thrilled, So thank you.